The call came at 6 in the morning. Not the kind of call anyone in royal security wanted on a gray Tuesday in November. A threat had been logged. Vague, unverified, but logged, and in the world of royal protection, logged meant acted upon. No exceptions, no delays. By 7, 2 officers were inside Clarence's house, moving through its corridors with the practiced calm of people who had learned long ago to keep their faces neutral regardless of what their stomachs were doing. The older of the 2 was named Gordon, 14 years on the royal protection detail. He had swept rooms in 3 different palaces, stood guard through 2 funerals and 1 coronation, and had developed a particular talent for making himself invisible in spaces where invisibility was the highest professional virtue. He knew which floors creaked. He knew which staff members could be trusted to stay out of the way, and which ones lingered at doorways pretending to dust things. He knew, more than anything, which rooms were simply rooms, and which rooms carried a weight that had nothing to do with the furniture inside them. The younger officer was named Peter, 6 weeks into the posting. Still learning the geography of the building, still occasionally turning left when he should have turned right, still very much the kind of person who took his clipboard seriously in the way that only very new people do. He was good at his job, efficient, attentive. He just did not yet know the things that no training manual ever put into writing. They moved through the ground floor first. Drawing rooms, staff quarters, kitchens, utility corridors, everything clear, everything exactly as it should be. The building breathed around them the way old buildings do, a low, settled presence that was neither welcoming nor hostile, simply there, simply itself. They moved upstairs. The upper floor of Clarence's house was different from the lower one in a way that was difficult to explain and very easy to feel. Downstairs had the quality of a place designed to be seen, high ceilings, certain light, rooms arranged for function and presentation in equal measure. Upstairs was quieter, more personal. The corridors were narrower and the light came through smaller windows, and the whole length of the hallway had the feeling of a space that had been lived in over a long stretch of time by someone who did not particularly care whether it looked impressive. Gordon led, Peter followed. They worked room by room, methodical, unhurried. A sitting room with bookshelves that ran floor to ceiling, a small study, a bathroom. A bedroom whose door they knocked on twice before opening, found empty and cleared in under 3 minutes. Then they reached the end of the east corridor. There was a door there, plain, no different in appearance from any of the other doors they had opened that morning. Dark wood, brass handle, a small keyhole below the lock mechanism that suggested the door was older than the rest of the fittings around it. Gordon stopped in front of it. He did not immediately reach for the handle. Peter looked at him. Gordon looked at the door. The pause lasted maybe 4 seconds. To someone watching, it would have looked like nothing. A man collecting his thoughts, a brief moment of ordinary hesitation. Peter did not read it for what it was. He stepped forward and opened the door. The smell reached them first, not unpleasant, nothing like that. It was the smell of paper and cedar and something faintly floral, the kind of smell that belongs to old things that have been carefully kept. The smell of preservation, of deliberate safekeeping. The smell of a room that someone had tended the way a gardener tends a very old and very particular plant, not for display, but because the alternative was unthinkable. It was a closet, not large, perhaps 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep, with a low ceiling and a single light fitting that Peter reached up and clicked on. The light was warm, amber almost. It settled over the contents of the room the way afternoon light settles over a photograph, softening everything slightly, making the edges less sharp. The walls on both sides were lined with shelving. Dark wood, the same as the door, worn smooth at the edges from years of things being placed and removed and placed again. On the shelves sat boxes. Hat boxes, filing boxes, and several that belonged to no obvious category at all, simply boxes, sealed, labeled in a handwriting that was neither large nor decorative but very precise. There were garment bags hanging from a rail along the back wall, zipped and labeled in the same hand. There were shoes arranged along the bottom shelf with a care that was almost architectural, and there were books, not many, perhaps a dozen, stacked horizontally on the topmost shelf, their spines facing out. Peter stood at the threshold and looked at it. Gordon stood just behind him and said nothing. What Peter was looking at was orderly, carefully arranged. There was no chaos here, no pile of forgotten things that accumulates at the back of spaces people do not tend. Every item had been placed with intention. Every box was exactly where it was supposed to be. And yet the room had a quality to it that made Peter feel, in a way he could not immediately name, that he was standing somewhere he was not supposed to be. Not because anything was hidden. Because everything was known. There is a difference between a secret and something private, A secret is a thing you are afraid of. A private thing is a thing you have simply chosen not to share with the world because the world does not have the right to it. What Peter was looking at was the second kind. He understood this without being able to articulate it, the way you sometimes understand something important before the words for it arrive. He took a step inside. Gordon said his name, quietly, just the one syllable. Peter stopped. He turned around. Gordon was looking at him with an expression that was entirely calm and somehow, beneath that calm, very serious. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. He simply looked at Peter the way a person looks at someone who is about to make a mistake they cannot take back, and Peter understood without further explanation that his job right now was to step back over the threshold and pull the door closed. He did. Gordon checked the handle, locked. He made a note on his clipboard, 2 words, nothing more. They finished the sweep. The rest of the floor took 11 minutes. They found nothing of concern anywhere. The building was secure. The threat, whatever it had been, was not present inside these walls. They went downstairs. They sat in the small office off the main entrance and completed their paperwork. The building's head of security came and went. Signatures were given. Hands were shaken. Gordon and Peter walked out into the gray November morning, and the door of Clarence's house closed behind them. Peter waited until they were at the car. What was in there? He said. Gordon looked at him across the roof of the car. The morning light was flat and cold, and it made everything look very precise. Nothing that concerns the security detail, Gordon said. I know that, Peter said. I'm asking what it was. Gordon opened the car door. He got in. Peter got in on the other side. For a moment, neither of them moved. The engine was not running. The street outside was quiet. Some rooms, Gordon said finally, not looking at him. You file the clearance and you move on. You don't carry the contents of a room around with you. It's not your room. It was never your room. Peter looked out through the windshield. There were letters in there, he said. I could see the edges of them. Gordon started the engine. Peter, he said, file it, move on. Peter did not say anything else. But he did not move on, not really. Not in the way Gordon meant. Because the room had done something to him that he could not undo, the way rooms sometimes do when they belong to a life that is larger and older and more layered than anything you were prepared to encounter at 6 a.m. on a gray Tuesday in November. He drove, he filed the report. He ate lunch at his desk and answered 3 emails and sat through a briefing about updated access protocols for the following month. And all day, at the back of his mind, he kept seeing the same thing. The shelves, the boxes, the shoes arranged with architectural care, the books stacked with their spines facing out. The handwriting on the labels, precise, unhurried, the handwriting of a person who knew exactly what they were keeping and exactly why. He kept coming back to one label in particular. He had only glimpsed it for a moment, half a second at most, before Gordon had said his name and he had stepped back. But it had stayed with him the way certain images stay, not because they are dramatic, but because they are true. The label had 2 words on it, just 2, written in that same precise, unhurried hand. He could not stop thinking about what those 2 words meant. What they said about the woman who had written them. What they said about the life that had been lived before the one the world was shown. He drove home that evening through streets that were already dark by 4 in the afternoon. He parked the car. He sat for a moment before going inside. The closet was locked. The report was filed. The incident was, by every official measure, closed. But Peter sat in his parked car on a dark Tuesday evening and thought about 2 words on a label and felt the particular weight of knowing something that was never meant for him. He went inside. He did not speak of it. Not that night. The question was how long that would last. The answer turned out to be 11 days. Not because Peter was careless. Not because he was the kind of person who traded in information for social currency or liked the feeling of holding something over a room. He was not that kind of person. He had gone into royal protection precisely because discretion was, for him, not a professional requirement but a personal value. He genuinely believed that some things were private and that the privacy of those things deserved to be honored. But 11 days after the sweep, he made the mistake that most people make not out of malice, but out of the very ordinary human need to be known by someone. He told his wife. Her name was Claire. She was a school librarian in Kensington. She was practical and warm and entirely uninterested in the social world of royal households, and Peter had chosen her partly for those reasons, because she existed in a part of his life that was entirely separate from his work, and that separation had always felt clean and safe. He told her on a Wednesday evening. They were eating dinner. He told her the way you tell a partner something that has been sitting in you too long, not with drama, not with excitement, but with the quiet relief of putting something down that has become heavier than you expected. He told her about the corridor, the door, the smell of cedar and old paper, the shelves, the labels. He told her the two words. Claire listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "That is very sad." Not shocking, not scandalous. Sad. Peter looked at her. "Yes," he said, "it is." They finished dinner. They cleared the table. Claire went to read and Peter watched television, and neither of them mentioned it again that evening. But the thing about sharing a piece of information with someone else is that it is no longer only yours. That is the point of sharing it. That is also, in certain circumstances, the danger of it. Claire did not tell anyone. She was as private as Peter in her way. But 3 days later at work, she mentioned to a colleague, in the context of a conversation about something else entirely, in the casual way that one detail sometimes floats to the surface of an unrelated discussion, that her husband worked in royal protection, and that there were rooms in certain buildings that told you more about a person than any official portrait ever could. Her colleague, whose name was Diane, found this interesting. Diane was not a gossip, not professionally. But she had a cousin who worked in catering, and the catering world and the household world of royal residences overlapped more than people realized, and information moved through that overlap the way water moves through old stone, slowly, without announcement, finding the paths of least resistance. The detail Diane passed on was small, imprecise. She did not know the two words, she did not know the specifics. She knew only that there was a room in Clarence's house that someone had described as telling a story that the official record did not tell. That was enough, because there was already someone paying attention. His name was Oliver Marsh. He was not a tabloid journalist. He had a desk at a publication that took itself seriously, a publication with editors who required documentation and multiple sources and would not run a story on the strength of a rumor alone. He had been covering the royal household for 9 years. He was not interested in manufactured scandal. He was interested in the gap between the version of events that was presented to the public and the version that was actually true. He had been interested in Camilla for some time, not in a hostile way, in the way that a person becomes interested in a subject that the official record has consistently underserved. He felt, based on years of research and dozens of conversations with people at the edges of the household, that there was a version of her life that had never been properly told. Not because it was dark or damaging, but because it was human, and human things were precisely what the institution was best at smoothing away. When a contact mentioned, vaguely, third-hand, that something had been found during a security sweep at Clarence's house, Oliver Marsh started making calls. He was careful, he was patient. He made 5 calls over 4 days and got nothing useful from any of them. On the 6th call, he reached someone who had been in the building the week of the sweep, not a guard, not a senior member of staff, but someone in the kind of support role that makes a person invisible in the way Gordon was professionally invisible, present everywhere, noticed by no one. This person had not seen the inside of the closet, but they had seen Gordon's face when he came back downstairs after the sweep. They described it carefully. He looked like someone who had just remembered something they had spent a long time trying to forget, they said. Not upset, not disturbed, just reminded. Oliver wrote that down. He sat with it for a long time. Then he started to think about what, specifically, might produce that expression on the face of a man with 14 years on the royal protection detail. Not danger. Gordon had seen danger. Danger did not produce that particular look. Not something illegal. Something illegal would have produced a very different chain of events. Something personal, something private. Something that, when encountered without warning in the middle of a professional task, had the power to return a composed and experienced man briefly to a place of simple human feeling. Oliver thought about the woman whose rooms those were. He thought about her history, the long years, the weight of them. He thought about what a woman who had lived that particular life might keep. He thought about the difference between a secret and a private thing. And he picked up the phone again. What Oliver Marsh did not know, what no one outside a very small circle knew at that point, was that the news had already reached Clarence House. Not through the press, not through any of the channels Oliver was working. Through the older, quieter route by which things always eventually reached the people they concerned most, a word from one trusted person to another, passed carefully, without writing anything down. The word reached a woman named Frances. She was the senior lady-in-waiting, a title that sounded ceremonial and was in fact one of the most demanding jobs in the household. Frances had been in her position for over a decade. She was the kind of person who understood, instinctively and completely, the difference between what needed to be addressed and what needed to be managed, and she understood that this fell into the second category. She went to Charles, not to his private secretary, not through official channels. To Charles directly at 7 in the morning, in the small breakfast room he used on days when he was in residence, and preferred not to have the day start with ceremony. She told him what she knew, which was not much: a security sweep, the east corridor closet accessed without prior clearance, the matter contained within the building's official record and no further action anticipated. And then the other thing. The thing that was the reason she was standing in the breakfast room at 7 in the morning rather than waiting until a more conventional hour. A journalist had started making calls. Charles listened to all of this without expression. He drank his tea, he set the cup down. "Does she know?" he said. "Not yet," Frances said. "She should hear it from me," he said. Frances nodded. She left. Charles finished his tea. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the breakfast room. Outside the window, the garden was very still. The November light was the color of old paper. He stood and he went to find his wife. The conversation happened in a room with no staff present, no secretary, no aide, just the two of them, in the way that the most significant conversations in a long marriage always happen, without witness, without record, without any account that will ever make its way into any official file. What passed between them, unknown. What was visible afterward to everyone in the household, everything. Camilla came to lunch. She sat at the head of the table. She spoke to the people seated near her with the same attentiveness she always brought to those conversations, interested, present, occasionally very funny in the precise and understated way that people who have lived long enough to find the world genuinely absurd tend to be funny. She asked for tea. A member of staff brought a tray, 2 cups, the usual arrangement. She looked at the tray for a moment. Then she said quietly to the member of staff nearest her, "Just the one, I think." The second cup was taken away. She drank her tea, she finished lunch. She thanked the people around her and excused herself. The member of staff who had removed the second cup said nothing to anyone for the rest of the afternoon. But she thought about it for a long time afterward. The 2 cups on the tray, the instruction, the 1 cup remaining. There are things you cannot explain and do not need to. They simply sit with you. They come back to you at unexpected moments. You are washing dishes or walking to work or lying in the dark waiting for sleep, and suddenly you are back in that room, holding a tray with 1 cup on it, understanding something you have no words for. She kept it to herself. She was not the only one. Oliver Marsh spent 12 days on the story. He was thorough, he was careful. He did not print a word he could not support, and he did not support a word he had not verified. That was not the kind of journalist he was, and it was not the kind of publication he worked for. What he eventually had was this: a confirmed security sweep. A confirmed access to private storage on the upper floor of Clarence House. 2 sources, independently, describing an unusual atmosphere in the building in the days that followed. One source, his best source, the one he trusted most, who could tell him not what was inside the closet, but what the experience of encountering it had done to a man trained to encounter almost anything without visible reaction. He did not have the 2 words. He did not know the 2 words existed. He wrote what he had. The piece ran on a Thursday morning. It was careful. It was precise. It named nothing it could not name and implied nothing it could not support. It said that a security sweep at Clarence House had produced what one source described as an unexpected discovery in the Duchess's private quarters. It said that the discovery was not of a security nature. It said that the building's household had responded in a way that several observers described, independently, as quietly significant. It said that what had been found appeared to be personal in nature. It said nothing further, because Oliver Marsh, for all his years and all his careful sourcing, did not actually know what had been found. He knew only that it mattered. And he suspected, based on everything he had spent 9 years learning about this particular woman and this particular life, that the reason it mattered was not because it was scandalous, but because it was true. The piece generated considerable attention, not the loud, tabloid kind. The quieter kind that spreads through conversations over desks and at dinner tables, the kind where people lean toward each other and say, "Did you read that thing?" And the question itself carries a weight that the article alone does not fully account for. At Clarence's house, the piece was read by Francis, who printed it and placed it in a specific folder without comment. By Charles, who read it twice and then set it aside. By at least 3 members of the household staff, who discussed it among themselves in the kind of low-voiced, thoughtful way that people discuss something they already know more about than the published version contains. And by Peter, who read it on his phone during his lunch break, sitting alone in his car in a car park in West London, and felt something move through him that was neither guilt nor relief, but something occupying the same territory as both. He had not spoken to anyone else. What Claire had told Diane, what Diane had told her cousin, what had eventually reached Oliver Marsh, Peter had not known about any of those connections when they happened. He learned about them only later, piecing it together from things people said and did not say. He sat in his car and read the article. It was careful, it was respectful, it contained nothing that was wrong exactly. But it had opened a door. And doors, once opened, have a way of staying that way. The palace's response to the article was exactly what anyone familiar with the institution would have predicted. There was no statement, there was no denial, there was no confirmation. There was silence, deliberate, practiced, the specific and highly skilled silence of an institution that has had several centuries to perfect the art of not responding to things it does not wish to address. In certain rooms in the days that followed, conversations happened, quietly, without documentation, the kind of conversations that shape things without leaving a trace. Gordon was called in, not for a reprimand, not officially. He was called in for what his supervisor described as a routine review, and what took place in that review was a conversation that lasted 40 minutes and was never written down. Peter was called in separately. His review took 20 minutes. His supervisor asked him several questions in a tone of professional neutrality, and Peter answered them in the same tone, and when the review was over, Peter walked out into the corridor and stood for a moment with his back against the wall. He had not lied, he had answered every question truthfully. He had said that he had looked into the room, that Gordon had called his name, that he had stepped back and closed the door. He had not mentioned Claire. He had not mentioned dinner. He had not mentioned the 2 words on the label. He told himself that last part was because the 2 words were not relevant to the security question under review. He was not entirely sure he believed himself. A month later, he received a transfer, a different posting. Technically a step forward, a more prominent assignment, better hours, a location that was considered preferable by most of his colleagues. He accepted it, he thanked the people he was supposed to thank. He shook Gordon's hand on his last day at the old posting, and Gordon looked at him with that same expression of complete professional calm and said, "Take care of yourself, Peter." Peter said that he would. He walked out, he got in his car. He sat for a moment, as he had on the evening of the sweep in the car park at the end of his shift. He thought about the room, the amber light, the smell. He thought about the shelves and the boxes, and the shoes arranged with care that went beyond the merely practical into something that was its own kind of language. He thought about the 2 words on the label. And he thought about what Claire had said on that Wednesday evening over dinner, when he had finally set the weight of it down between them. "That is very sad. Not shocking. Sad." He started the engine. He drove home through the London evening, through streets lit orange against a dark sky, through the ordinary traffic of ordinary lives. He parked, he went inside, he hung his coat on the hook by the door. Claire was in the kitchen. She looked up when he came in. "Last day," she said. "Last day," he said. She nodded, she handed him a cup of tea. He took it and stood at the kitchen counter and drank it. Neither of them said anything about the closet. Neither of them needed to. It was in the room the way certain things are always in rooms, long after the people who put them there have left, present without announcement, heavy without being visible, the kind of thing that does not go away simply because you stop talking about it. What the article had not said, what Oliver Marsh had not known and could not have known, because he did not have the two words, and because the two words were the only key that unlocked the real meaning of what Gordon and Peter had seen, was what the closet actually was. Not a storage space, not in any meaningful sense a wardrobe. It was an archive, assembled over decades, added to carefully item by item, occasion by occasion, with the kind of sustained intention that most people apply to very few things in their lives. It was a record, not an official one, not the kind of record that ended up in a library or a public collection or the formal history of an institution. A private record, a personal one, the kind that a person builds not because they are told to, but because they need to. Because the alternative, the absence of such a record, would be its own kind of loss. What it archived was not a public life. It was a private one. The years before, the long, complicated, beautiful, and difficult years that had existed before the world formed its settled opinion of who Camilla was and what she represented, the friendships, the letters. The ordinary objects of a life that had contained far more color and warmth and ordinary human richness than the version of events that had been written about her in newspapers and books and the long, ongoing argument of public opinion. The photographs were not of events, they were of people, people laughing, people sitting in gardens and kitchens and the back seats of cars, people caught mid-sentence, mid-laugh, mid-thought, people who were real and specific and loved. The letters were not correspondence in the formal sense. They were the actual words of people who had known her fully, personally, without the distorting lens of public life, and had written those words down in the way that people only write when they are not thinking about how it will look, but only about what they want to say. The box, the locked one, the one Peter had reached toward and Gordon had stopped him from touching, no one outside that room has ever confirmed what it contained. But it sat there on the shelf, labeled in that precise and unhurried hand, in a room that smelled of cedar and old paper and something faintly floral. And the room sat at the end of the east corridor. And the east corridor was part of a building. And the building stood in the middle of a city. And the city continued around it, entirely unaware. Camilla did not address the article. She did not address the sweep. She did not change her public schedule or her manner or the way she moved through the rooms of her life, which was with a steadiness and a certain quiet authority that people who worked closely with her had always described as one of her most defining qualities. She was, by all accounts, exactly the same the week after the story ran as she had been the week before. Except for one thing. The closet at the end of the east corridor was cleared, not emptied, moved. Its contents transferred to a location that no member of the household staff could identify and no member of the security detail was briefed on. The move happened over the course of a single afternoon. 2 people carried things, no one else was in the corridor. When it was done, the door at the end of the east corridor was closed. The lock mechanism was changed. The keyhole, the old one, the one that suggested the door was older than its fittings, was covered over with new trim. From the outside, it looked like every other door in the hallway. From the inside, a bare room, shelves empty, rail bare, the smell of cedar already beginning to fade, replaced by the neutral, slightly cool air of a space recently vacated. Frances walked the length of the corridor 2 days later, on a morning when Camilla was engaged elsewhere, and stopped outside the door. She stood for a moment. She did not open it. She did not need to. She was making sure. She walked back down the corridor. She went downstairs. She had 3 meetings before noon and a pile of correspondence that required her signature before the end of the day. She sat at her desk. She picked up her pen. She did not think about the corridor again. Or she tried not to. The thing about rooms that have held private things for a long time is that they leave an impression even after the things are gone, not a supernatural one. Simply the impression that accumulated presence always leaves a quality in the air, a specific quality that does not dissolve immediately upon departure. Frances had felt it, standing outside the door. She had felt the room on the other side of it, remembering what it had held. She sat at her desk, she signed correspondence, she took her first meeting. The morning continued. Peter heard about the move 3 weeks after it happened, from Gordon, in a brief exchange that lasted less than a minute. They had run into each other in a car park outside a building neither of them was currently posted to, the kind of accidental overlap that happens regularly in a professional world that is smaller than the outside assumes. Gordon told him the closet had been cleared, that the contents had been moved, that everything had been handled. Peter nodded. "Good," he said. Gordon looked at him. There was something in the look that was not quite an apology and not quite absolution, but occupied the space between the two. "It was nothing we were supposed to see," Gordon said. "No," Peter said. "And it's nobody's business," Gordon said. "Whatever was in there, it was hers. It was always only hers." Peter thought about the shelves, the photographs, the letters, the locked box. He thought about the 2 words on the label. He had carried them for weeks. He had turned them over in his mind so many times that they had worn smooth the way a stone wears smooth in moving water, losing their jagged edges but none of their weight. He had never spoken them aloud to anyone, not to Claire, not to Gordon, not to the supervisor who had asked him questions in a professionally neutral tone, not to himself even in the privacy of a moment when no one was present to hear. He had simply held them. And standing in the car park on a cold afternoon in December, with Gordon looking at him and the sky the color of old pewter overhead, he made a decision that he had probably made weeks ago without fully acknowledging it. He was going to keep them. The 2 words. He was going to keep them the way the room had kept its contents, not out of secrecy, not out of strategy, but because they had been, from the moment he had read them on that amberlit shelf at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in November, something that belonged to someone else. And belonging to someone else meant they were not his to give away. He shook Gordon's hand. He got in his car. He drove home through the city, through streets hung with the early lights of a December that had not yet fully committed to itself, through the warm and ordinary chaos of an evening that asked nothing of him except to be present to it. He parked. He went inside. Claire was reading. She looked up when he came in and smiled and went back to her book, which was the particular and comfortable rhythm of an evening in a long marriage, the greeting that does not require explanation, the shared quiet that has long since stopped being silence and become its own form of conversation. He sat down. He thought, for what he told himself was the last time, about the closet. The smell of cedar, the amber light, the shoes, the letters, the box. The handwriting. The 2 words. He thought about the woman who had written them, about the long and layered life that had produced them, about the version of that life that the world had been given and the version that had sat quietly on a shelf at the end of a corridor, waiting for no one in particular. Not demanding to be found. Not hiding. Simply existing, in the way that true things exist without apology and without announcement, patient, private, entirely itself. He thought about what Claire had said. "That is very sad." He sat with that for a moment. Then he let it go. Not because it did not matter, not because it had stopped being true, but because some things are not yours to carry, and knowing when to set something down is its own kind of honor. The room on the other side of the door at the end of the east corridor was empty now. The shelves were bare, the cedar smell was fading. By spring, it would be gone entirely, and the room would be simply a room, holding nothing but its own dimensions. But somewhere else, in a location that no briefing document recorded and no access list named, a room was holding things again. Boxes, letters, photographs of people laughing in gardens and kitchens and the back seats of cars, shoes arranged with the precision of someone who had always treated the objects of their life as worthy of care, books stacked with their spines facing out. And a locked box, and a label written in a precise and unhurried hand. And 2 words. Still there. Still exactly where they were supposed to be. Still hers.